Welcome to this Global Azure Bootcamp event for Sevilla. Um, my name is David Nudelman. I am consultant at Steeves and Associates here in Canada, leading the team delivering Azure and Microsoft 365 solutions to enterprise customers. I would like to thank very much my friend Nacho for inviting me slash forcing me to do those things. Without him, I wouldn't be here doing this today. So thank you very much, Nacho. We'll be talking about Azure Virtual Desktop, which is a modern take on the traditional remote desktop to address the needs for people to secure a remote um, desktop where they can be productive by accessing applications that are within the company, accessing a desktop with all their licensed software, everything to get them productive um, anywhere they want to be. So we refer here to the remote desktop traditional way, right? Which is, hey, you're in the cloud or at home, right? Whatever location you are on the internet, and you want to access a local, a full desktop hosted within a network with access to the resources you need. The most common implementation of that is remote desktop services or RDS. And that requires quite a few components like a broker, a gateway, licensing, web access if you want to make people's life easier. And you have the session hosts where the actual machines you're connecting to are. So remote desktop services introduces on just a point-to-point connection to a machine a few more possibilities and rules to allow people to connect to the resources they want. That evolved to VDI, the virtual desktop infrastructure. The main difference between VDI and the traditional RDS environment is that VDI tends to give you a one-to-one relationship with the user. So you're usually not connected to a multi-session server. You're connecting to an individual Windows 10 or 11 machine, and you're the only user on that machine. That's the main, I would say, difference from traditional RDS and VDI, right? Instead of connecting to a server hosting multiple sessions, multiple users per instance of server, VDI tends to be associated with a user connecting to a dedicated machine, uh, either a machine permanently assigned to that user, called dedicated or private machine, or a pool of machines um, that are available. And there's some personalization and profile levels that we're going to see that allows you to use that um, in a very intuitive manner. So when is those type of virtualizations useful? So when you need to provide a secure and regulated access to your information, systems, and so on. So that's very common in financial services, healthcare, government. When you have an elastic workforce, right? Mergers and acquisitions, so temporary solutions, expanding people, reducing the number of workforce, um, consultants, contractors, external partners, short-term employees, right? For Christmas, a lot of organizations need to hire extra people. You don't necessarily need all the extra hardware, so that might be a good solution for them. Remote employees, hey, why send laptops to people who are very far away? If they already have a device, they can be productive on their current device and experience all the power of the cloud machines that you're hosting. And specialized workloads, so software development environments, um, sometimes high GPU scenarios will be a part of that. So there's quite a few use cases for AVD. So talking more specifically about Azure Virtual Desktop. So the traditional server and desktop offering is based on a Windows Server desktop experience. So that's the shared environment. You have multiple people connecting to the same server, and each one having a session on that server. That requires, perpetual licenses of Office. You don't want that infrastructure to be very dynamic and updated often. Um, but it's a pretty stable environment and what companies have been using for a very long time. And for dedicated pool machines on the VDI model, you have the native Windows 10, 11 experience, single session per machine, and you have a better user experience by having a client OS instead of a server operating system running. What Azure Virtual Desktop offers on top of the traditional one is it offers the option to use a Windows 10 or 11 multi-session environment. So with a single installation, right, or instance of a virtual machine running Windows 10, 11 multi-session, you can have multiple users sharing the resources of the machine, making the end user experience much better, but also having much better resource management on your side. And if you're doing auto scaling, right, as people connect, you automatically get host provisioned and deprovisioned as people go away. You can have really significant savings using this model. The Azure Virtual Desktop architecture, there's a lot of reference architecture published out there, including some GitHub repositories that will deploy stuff for you based on a few variables. But it tends to connect um, or provision the same type of resources. So, how does Azure Virtual Desktop differs from the traditional RDS? I think that the main reason is the stuff here on the right of this slide is which components are managed by Microsoft and not by you. So in a traditional RDS environment, as we've seen, we need to connect and manage the broker, the load balancing, um, the gateway, and a lot of the components that make it work. With Azure Virtual Desktop, you have a managed instance of all those things. You also have a single point of entry for all the users, and that's managed by Microsoft. So you don't need to know, how many front ends, load balancing, or anything. Microsoft will provide the way in, and that will be based on the authentication method you choose. And Microsoft is also managing compute, storage, and networking. So, what do you manage and decide on Azure Virtual Desktop? Well, everything else, right? Are you using a shared server session, like the traditional RDS model? Are you doing, dedicated pooled machines one to one, like in the traditional VDI method? Or are you going to use the new client OS, Windows 10 and 11 multi-session? Um, it's up to you. And not only you have the ability to deliver a full desktop, but you can also deliver a remote app. So if you're not familiar with remote app, I think we're all familiar with the remote desktop um, methodology where you get a full desktop and you have your applications and you have your start menu. But one of the options is to publish a remote app. So remote app is you get a full screen. It looks or a window that looks pretty much like an application that's running on your machine, but in reality, that's a presentation virtualization, right? That machine is actually running on a session on a server or a machine, but you can only see the application. So you get the feeling the application is running locally on your machine, but it's actually presenting something that's running um, in the background. And you also can manage elements like uh, the image, which applications go, how do you manage your profiles, user density, VM sizing, scaling policies. Those are very important for large environments to manage how the pool grows and contracts based on how your users are using the environment, and all the networking policies. And that also allows you to connect to the rest of your infrastructure. Um, there's different ways to access Azure Virtual Desktop. You can have the remote desktop application on your device, and then you can get the individual applications. So here's an example with Paint, WordPad, and Internet Explorer published as applications, not as full desktops. And you can also have a remote desktop published. Uh, Another cool, I would say, innovation is the ability to have a full desktop experience that's pretty good without the need to install in the remote desktop agent directly from any browser that supports HTML5. That's very cool. So you get the full experience. You can even go full screen, but you're actually still running on a browser. We're going to see a demo of that very shortly. So full desktops versus remote app, right? So you need to make a decision. So full desktop is good when um, you need more power than you have in the local machines, when people are using outdated hardware, when they're using non-standard hardware, right? So if you have users working from home and you don't have control over those machines, they can be using a Mac, an Android tablet with an external mouse and keyboard. They may have an old computer. They might be using a Chromebook. So publishing a full desktop is an interesting way to really provide all those tools for them to be productive. Using remote web app is you can run multiple versions of the same app. You can deliver just an application. So, for example, if you're an external service provider and you want people to access your internal developed application and just deliver that, not a full desktop, because you don't want people consuming other resources like browsers and Outlook and stuff like that, you can publish just an application. Another scenario is if you have multiple versions of the same application and it cannot be installed on the same machine, that's a good way to deliver the multiple versions. We see that a lot in lawyers and financial management institutions where they need historical data archived for people to consult. So you can publish, the current version of the software on their desktop and a remote app for the older version so they can still consult and check data. Another very cool innovation on AVD is the MSI X app attach. So that's a way to quickly publish applications to users. So you don't need to actually install the application on the machine. So you don't need to create a base machine with applications installed for every scenario. You can, based on group membership, um, do an MSIX app attach. So the application is packaged as MSIX and it's on a virtual hard disk format. So that virtual hard disk just gets attached to the machine, and then it's kind of almost a virtualized way to attach a machine. So you don't need to keep modifying your virtual machine pools to cover all sorts of different scenarios. You can actually just get that in place, and based on group membership, the users will get the right applications by connecting to their Azure Virtual Desktop. That's very cool, very powerful, and it really simplifies management. So you could potentially have a very reduced number of base images and pools and still allow the flexibility of only delivering the applications to the people who need them. So here's an example. You have the users with different session hosts, and you have the file server hosting, the VHDX with the application, and you can easily deploy those apps. So one conversation that I get into a lot is, "Hey, I'm a Citrix user, right? Our company currently uses Citrix. How does AVD play with Citrix? Or I have VMware investments. Can I leverage those investments with VMware and still use AVD? Oh, and I also heard about Windows 365. What is it, and when should I use Windows 365 instead of Azure Virtual Desktop?" So let's tackle one by one. I'll start with the middle, Azure Virtual Desktop. So Azure Virtual Desktop allows you a lot of control and flexibility. You have the multi-session Windows VMs, uh, and you can leverage a lot of the Azure resources. You can host application on Azure. You can host your whole infrastructure on Azure, and it's effectively on the same network. It has the remote app streaming, and it allows kind of high performance computing. It's scalable. It's easy to report on costs. Uh, the management and maintenance, I would say, is average. You will still need your, third line support person, infrastructure management people to keep it running the same way you did on RDS, with some knowledge of imaging and a little bit of application packaging. If your company is very small or you don't want to spend a lot of time managing, Windows 365 is a good, I would say, middle ground. Windows 365 is one dedicated machine per user, um, with very simple administration. Windows 365 actually doesn't really live in Azure. It lives in Microsoft 365, and it's assigned through a Microsoft 365 license, unlike Azure resources that are consumption based. So um, Windows 365 provides an easy, predictable way to say, hey, a machine per user with 1 or 2 cores and 8 gig of RAM will cost X per month per user. Let's create a number, right? 50. And the implementation of that is very, very simple through the Microsoft 365 uh, portal. So you can provision machines to a group. When user edits the group, the machines are provisioned. He goes to the web interface or the RDS client and he can connect to that machine. Uh, Easy to manage, easy to deploy. Uh, Azure Virtual Desktop has more flexibility and it's good for specialized systems. Hey, how about my Citrix and VMware investments? Well, they both signed recent partnerships as well with Microsoft, so you can extend your on-premises environment and use AVD as a host pool to still use your Citrix and VMware environment, which is a very cool collaboration, allowing companies to make their own decisions, especially when it comes to profile management, licensing management, integration with other systems they have in house. So, choosing the right solution is important for you and your team. And it's, from my view, down mostly to what your team internal capabilities are and how much budget, money you have available. The cool thing about AVD and Windows 365 is you can manage those machines using Intune. So you can keep them up to date, you can deploy applications, you can report, and you can measure their level of security and enforce settings on them. So, how do you get started with AVD? So, Microsoft has a lot of resources. So, I think the first decision really is to how are you going to do identity? Are you going to synchronize your Active Directory or connect it with, Express Route or something like that? How are you going to get an identity source? Or are you going to use, the Enter ID managed domain or domain services? How we're going to manage your profiles? Are you going to use FS Logics? How are you going to host it? And so on. Second, you need to set up a Azure Resource Manager portal, configure FS Logics, and run whatever scripts you need to run, and then you can manage your infrastructure in Azure. Oh, and here's a link with a lot of good information. So aka.ms/start AVD. So when we're talking about identity setup, we can talk about cloud-based organizations. So you have an Azure Active Directory or Entra now. You can get an Azure Active Directory domain services. So that's a managed service that provides identity inside Azure. And then you can use those to run your AVD environment. So there'll be cloud based credentials. FS Logics has a few options as well. Um, they can integrate with Azure Files, they can integrate with NetApp files on Azure. So there's a few configuration options that are worth exploring. Um, it really depends on the scenario and how big your environment will be. Now we're going to see some demos. So here we have a demo of how easy it is to log in. You just access you're on the browser and you input your credentials, but you also have the option to use the remote desktop application. By opening that, you're prompted with a let's get started, and you can subscribe to a pool. So here I can add my credentials, a password, will log me in and show me what resources I have available. In this case, a full session. It's the first time connecting, so it will take a few seconds to load, but it's not a long process. And here we are. We have a full desktop session based on Windows 11 with Office available. With Windows 365, you can have a similar experience. So if you go to windows365.microsoft.com, you can log in and you can see which virtual machines are available to you. Unlike AVD, that you connect to a resource pool and can have multiple different resources, here you have the machines, the individual machines are located to you. One of the options is to open in browser, and that will give me a full screen Windows 11 machine, I can select which options and what I can redirect. And by connecting to my machine, I have access to all the resources I need to be productive. So it wants to know where I am. The advantage of that it's automatically synchronizing location and time depending on your time zone. Uh, and here we go. My full Windows 11 machine, customized with the things I want. So you can see the taskbar here's on the left, and I can access my applications and recent files uh, very easily and have full access to the applications I need to be productive. That's very cool. Uh, there's two other things that are worth mentioning for Windows 365. Uh, so, uh, so the full mode experience is pretty good, right? You have all the applications available as if you were on a machine. Um, Real, full screen experience. Two other things worth noting is the integration. So if you are using the remote desktop um, application and you have it installed on your machine, you have something very cool you can use. If you press Windows tab, you can say, hey, I can create a new Windows desktop, but I can also connect to my um, Windows virtual machine. So we'll ask for authentication. It really helps if you type the right things in. So again, if I go to my virtual desktop, it will get ready. So I'm actually using three screens here, and the experience spans across the three screens. So I have two horizontal screens and a vertical screen in the middle. And there you go. I can easily access my things by pressing Windows tab, right? So here's I'm on a Windows 365 machine, and by pressing Windows tab again, I can go back to my local desktop. It's a very cool functionality to easily integrate Windows 365 into your day-to-day working habits. It's a very easy way as well to separate types of work, right? If you have multiple functions, you can, like if you're a developer, you can have your developer tools in one and just communication, Teams, email, and chat in the other. Um, and another possibility, right? Since Windows 365 is a fully featured um, machine that allows people to be productive, you can even change the boot settings on a machine and have it boot the machine directly to Windows 365. So you get a logon screen as long as you're connected to the internet, you're in. So that's a very cool functionality to be able to boot directly to Windows 365. Um, if you follow me on LinkedIn, I will post something regarding that functionality. Um, in a few days as a follow up to this session. As final remarks, I want to point to the fact that if you're implementing AVD at large scale, the whole orchestration of scaling up and down and managing hosts effectively is what can really, really save you money by adopting AVD. We strongly recommend Nerdio as the tool to manage the orchestration and manage your environment. So if you're an MSP, there is a software to manage multiple instances for multiple customers. And if you're a single enterprise corporation, you have Nardio Enterprise to manage the whole orchestration. It's worth checking it out. So I want to know more about Azure. How do I develop my Azure skills? How do I set up a landing zone? What are the best practices for Azure Virtual Desktop? The answer to that question and many others Azure related are all in the Microsoft Cloud Adoption Framework. So here you have strategies. How do you migrate? How do you plan? How do you get ready? Innovation, security, management, uh, all different types of assessments that are available to you. Really, really useful resource. Microsoft Cloud Adoption Framework. Uh, if you don't follow me yet, the only social media I'm really active is LinkedIn. I also run the Vancouver Technology User Group here in Vancouver, Canada. So if you want to join one of our virtual sessions and your time zone allows, or just watch the recording on the Vantag YouTube channel. And yeah, please connect on LinkedIn and let's start a conversation and keep in touch. Once again, thank you very much to my friend Nacho for pushing me to do this. I'm glad he did, and I hope you enjoy the rest of this Global Azure Bootcamp. Well, Global Azure event, no longer bootcamp. Right? Thank you. Adios y hasta luego.